In a stunning twist that no one expected, the Archbishop of Canterbury has officially announced that Prince William and Princess Catherine will be crowned this year. The declaration, made live from Canterbury Cathedral, has left Britain in disbelief. What was meant to be a simple sermon has now rewritten royal history overnight. The moment the cathedral fell silent. The morning light poured through the towering stained glass of Canterbury Cathedral, scattering a golden haze across the centuries-old stone floor. It was a day that had begun like any other, with quiet prayers, tourists snapping photos, and the soft hum of choir rehearsals echoing under vaulted ceilings. But as the great clock struck 10, the air shifted. Every sound seemed to still, as though the cathedral itself understood that history was about to change. At the heart of the pulpit stood the newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, Dame Sarah Mullally, a woman whose presence embodied both compassion and command. Known across Britain for her calm dignity, she had been the unexpected choice to succeed the late Justin Welby. And yet, as she stepped forward, her voice carried a steadiness that seemed almost divine. Her sermon began softly, an invocation about faith, unity, and the endurance of tradition. Listeners bowed their heads, expecting the usual liturgical reflection. But then, after a measured pause, she raised her gaze, eyes locking directly with the cameras. Her next words shattered every expectation. "By the will of His Majesty and the consent of the Crown Council," she said, her tone solemn yet resolute, "the coronation of their Royal Highnesses, William and Catherine, shall take place this year." Gasps rippled through the pews. A woman dropped her prayer book. A man whispered, "This year," under his breath. The live broadcast cut to stunned anchors trying to interpret what they'd just heard. No one had anticipated this. No leaks, no hints, not even the usual royal sources. For a moment, even the vast cathedral seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the bells tolled, not as they would for morning, but in echoing affirmation, their chimes carrying across the cobbled streets of Canterbury. Within minutes, the nation was alight with confusion, excitement, and disbelief. Had the Archbishop just announced the end of Charles's reign? Or was this an act of divine succession, a coordinated transition long planned behind closed palace doors? Inside the cathedral, Dame Mullally lowered her head in prayer, her expression grave. The magnitude of her words hung heavy in the stillness. Across every news outlet, the same phrase repeated in bold headlines: "Coronation confirmed, this year." It was not just a statement, it was a turning point. In that instant, the centuries-old rhythm of monarchy had shifted, not by death or scandal, but by sacred declaration. The crowd outside began to grow, reporters converging at the cathedral gates, microphones trembling with anticipation. The United Kingdom had witnessed many royal announcements, but none delivered with such divine finality. And as the great bells rang again, it was clear. Britain was standing on the edge of a new royal dawn. A nation in shock. Across Britain, televisions froze mid-broadcast as breaking alerts interrupted regular programming. Coffee cups paused mid-air, phones buzzed across kitchen counters, and within seconds, millions were staring at the same words. Archbishop announces, "Coronation of William and Catherine this year." From London's busy cafes to small village pubs in Yorkshire, disbelief filled the air. The phrasing of the Archbishop's message was deliberate, yet its implications were seismic. She hadn't said "next year," nor "when the time comes," she had said "this year." The United Kingdom hadn't heard such urgency in royal language since Queen Elizabeth II's historic ascension more than 7 decades ago. In Westminster, government officials exchanged hurried calls with Buckingham Palace, desperate for confirmation. At the BBC headquarters, producers rewrote scripts in real time. Meanwhile, outside Canterbury, a sea of people gathered, holding Union Jacks and smartphones, waiting for clarity that never came. The Archbishop's announcement carried a tone not of celebration, but of inevitability. Her cadence was prayerful, yet edged with solemn purpose. Analysts on Sky News noted the subtle theological weight of her phrasing. This wasn't a political decision, it was a spiritual transfer of duty. At Downing Street, an unnamed insider reportedly said, "We've been told to prepare for transition, but not like this." And across social media, the shockwave was instant. Within hours, hashtags like #NewMonarchs, #Catherine-Crowned, and #CharlesStepsDown dominated every platform. Memes mixed with tears, speculation with reverence. By midday, the palace had released only a single line through the press office. The Archbishop's statement stands as delivered. That silence spoke volumes. Commentators debated whether this was a sign of the king's declining health or a carefully orchestrated move for stability. Supporters of William and Catherine rejoiced, calling it the people's coronation. Others mourned what felt like the quiet sunset of a monarch still alive, but stepping aside in grace. Outside Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered, laying flowers and waving flags in anticipation. The mood was neither somber nor jubilant. It was suspended between eras. An old reign was exhaling. A new one was drawing its first breath. And somewhere behind closed palace doors, King Charles watched the reaction unfold, not with surprise, but with acceptance. For in his heart, he knew this had always been the plan. The unspoken question: what about King Charles? Even as the Archbishop's declaration echoed through the nation, one question thundered louder than the cathedral bells. What about the king? The omission of his name, the lack of any reference to his presence or participation, was too deliberate to ignore. Royal watchers noted immediately that this was not a transition announced after the king's passing, but during his reign. And that, in the history of British monarchy, was almost unthinkable. For weeks, whispers had circulated within royal circles about King Charles III's declining health. His reduced appearances, unexplained absences from key engagements, and carefully worded palace statements about rest had only fueled speculation. Behind the grandeur of royal processions and televised addresses, a quieter truth had been unfolding. The king's health was fragile, and his physicians had advised him to begin preparing for a slower pace of life. When the Archbishop spoke, she never used the word abdication, but her phrasing, "by the will of His Majesty," made it unmistakably clear. This was not a forced transition. It was an act of will, an intentional passing of duty, not of death. The phrase, "in strength, not sympathy," began circulating hours later, allegedly taken from a private memo shared between senior courtiers. It captured the essence of the king's decision. To hand over power before illness or fate made the choice for him. That night, the BBC ran a special segment simply titled, "A Living Transition." Experts explained that never before in modern monarchy had a reigning sovereign chosen to initiate the coronation of his successor while still alive. Not even Queen Elizabeth II, who had quietly mentored both Charles and William for decades, had done so. But those who knew Charles best understood his reasoning. He had lived in the shadow of legacy long enough to understand the cost of hesitation. Palace insiders later revealed that the king had written the Archbishop's speech himself, reviewing every line in Balmoral just days before it was read. He wanted the words to be reverent but final, not a resignation, but a benediction. It was, in essence, his way of rewriting royal tradition, passing the crown not as inheritance, but as trust. When questioned by reporters, the Archbishop's response was simple yet profound. The king remains sovereign in heart and counsel. But this is the dawn of what he calls a shared reign of faith and renewal. The next morning, photographs of Charles leaving Clarence House surfaced online, pale, serene, and smiling faintly at the cameras. He waved, but said nothing. For once, silence spoke louder than any royal decree. The king had made peace with history. Britain had just witnessed the rarest of events. A monarch letting go while still alive to see the crown carried forward by love, not loss. Why the Archbishop chose this moment. In the hours after her announcement, Archbishop Sarah Mullally became the most talked-about figure in Britain. Her calm delivery, her quiet authority, and the timing of her message raised one question everywhere. Why now? What had prompted her to make such a defining proclamation in such an unorthodox way? The answer, as palace sources later confirmed, lay in a private conversation between the Archbishop and the king held weeks earlier inside Windsor Castle's Garter Room. There, surrounded by portraits of past monarchs and the weight of history, the king had spoken of his legacy and his fears. He had told her with deep sincerity that he did not want his reign to end in crisis or confusion. "If my time is brief," he reportedly said, "let my son's era begin with light, not shadow." Sarah Mullally, a former nurse turned cleric, carried a compassion that few before her had brought to the role of Archbishop. She had tended to suffering in hospitals before ever preaching from a pulpit. To her, leadership was not about power, it was about healing, and she viewed the monarchy through the same lens. When she addressed the nation, her words were chosen as carefully as any surgeon's incision. Let this be a year not of endings, but of renewals. A year in which faith meets courage and tradition embraces tomorrow. It was a sermon disguised as history, a coronation framed not as replacement, but rebirth. Observers noted her symbolic setting too. Canterbury Cathedral, the mother church of Anglicanism, had been the site of royal prayers for 1,000 years, but it had never been the site of such an announcement. By delivering her message there, she anchored the coronation not in politics, but in divine continuity. The sense that the hand of faith, not the hand of man, was guiding the crown. As she concluded her address, she looked up toward the stained glass window depicting St. Augustine, the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and invoked his words, "Renew the face of the earth." It was a subtle yet powerful reminder that every era must pass for another to bloom. Outside, as the bells of Canterbury rang once more, the crowd began to cheer instead of question. They understood that this was not a crisis. It was a consecration. For the first time in years, Britain felt united, not under duty or despair, but under destiny. And as Dame Sarah left the pulpit, she whispered to an aide, "It is done." The light now shifts to them. The world had just witnessed not a political act, but a spiritual coronation, the kind that history only allows once in a century. The private blessing behind closed doors. In the hours before the world heard the Archbishop's voice, A far quieter moment unfolded deep within the stone walls of Windsor Castle. It was 6:45 a.m., the corridors still cloaked in silence, when two figures arrived under discreet escort, Prince William and Princess Catherine. They were led not to the throne room, but to St. George's Chapel, the resting place of kings and queens, where history breathes through every candle flame. There, waiting in the half-light, stood Archbishop Sarah Mullally, not in the grandeur of her ceremonial robes, but in the humble white stole of pastoral duty. On the altar lay a single sealed envelope, marked with the royal insignia of King Charles III. The moment she broke the wax seal, time itself seemed to slow. The Archbishop read aloud in steady cadence, her voice echoing beneath the vaulted arches. "Lead with kindness, my son and daughter, for the crown is a burden only love can carry. You have my faith, you have my blessing, and you have my heart." Witnesses said Catherine's eyes filled with tears, her hand instinctively finding William's. For years, the couple had carried the weight of public expectation, of tragedy inherited from Diana, and of responsibility thrust upon them too early. But in that moment, the tone changed. This was no longer a royal duty, it was destiny accepted. After the reading, the Archbishop placed her hands upon their joined palms, whispering a brief benediction once reserved only for monarchs. "Where faith is firm, fear shall not rule." Those words would later be inscribed discreetly inside Catherine's future coronation ring. Sources close to the couple described their expressions afterward as both humbled and resolute. William reportedly knelt before the altar, not out of formality, but reverence, while Catherine remained standing beside him, her chin lifted, her face calm, her resolve unshakable. The Archbishop later told aides that, "What I saw in them that morning was not fear, but peace." When they left the chapel, Windsor's dawn light broke through the clouds, casting twin beams across the stained glass of the Order of the Garter window. A visual echo of what was unfolding: two hearts, one crown, one calling. Hours later, when the Archbishop stood before the cameras at Canterbury, she was not merely speaking from a script. She was delivering a message the King himself had already entrusted, sealed in love, and opened by his chosen heirs. That private blessing behind closed doors would become the spiritual anchor of the coming coronation. A quiet promise that what was about to change Britain forever had begun not with power, but with prayer. Catherine's silent resolve. By midday, as the news of the coronation spread like wildfire across continents, Kensington Palace became a hive of controlled chaos. Advisors hurried through the corridors, aides fielded non-stop calls, and staff adjusted schedules that would define a new royal chapter. Yet amid the frenzy, one figure remained composed: Catherine, Princess of Wales. Sources inside the palace described her demeanor as calm, luminous, and unshaken. For years, Catherine had walked the tightrope between public scrutiny and private struggle, between the fragility of health and the strength of duty. But those who saw her that morning said something had changed. The woman who once served in the shadow of tradition now stood as its embodiment. She reportedly told her closest aide, "If the nation needs us now, we'll be ready." The words, delivered with characteristic grace, encapsulated the balance that had made her so beloved: humility and power in one breath. Immediately, preparations began. Advisors convened emergency briefings on protocol, wardrobe teams coordinated fittings for new state attire, and security teams revised schedules across Windsor, Sandringham, and Westminster. Catherine canceled every public appearance that wasn't essential, focusing entirely on her coronation briefings. Yet through it all, she made one request to her staff: no celebration, only preparation. Observers noted that Catherine's strength was quiet but magnetic, a strength forged not in the glare of publicity, but in the long years of restraint. Her resilience after personal trials had made her not only admired, but trusted. Even Princess Anne, who had long guarded the line of succession with steely loyalty, was said to have remarked privately, "She carries the crown already. She just hasn't been crowned yet." In the evening, as the palace lights dimmed, Catherine stood alone on the Kensington balcony, watching the sun set over London. Below, the city pulsed with renewed hope. Above, the sky burned gold and crimson, the colors of monarchy reborn. Insiders say she remained there for nearly 20 minutes, unmoving, her silhouette reflected in the glass, a queen in waiting, already wearing the weight of the future. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, words seen by no one but William. "It is not power we inherit, but trust, and I will not fail it." By morning, newspapers around the world carried the same headline: "The People's Queen has found her moment." And as London woke to the echo of distant cathedral bells, one truth had become clear. Catherine was no longer preparing for destiny. She had accepted it. William's private words to his father. As the day drew to a close, Buckingham Palace stood shrouded in twilight. Behind its grand facade, the atmosphere was thick with history, emotion, and the quiet hum of transition. The Archbishop's declaration had changed everything, yet within the royal household, one final act of duty remained: a conversation between father and son. At precisely 8:47 p.m., aides confirmed that Prince William placed a private call to King Charles III from his study at Kensington Palace. No press releases, no courtiers, no audience. Just two voices bound by blood and the weight of destiny. For a moment, the line held only silence, the kind of silence that carries decades of love, misunderstanding, and unspoken gratitude. According to palace sources, Charles spoke first, his tone measured but tender. "You have my blessing and my faith." Those words broke something within William. For years, his father's approval had been a quiet uncertainty, a tension between legacy and modernity, between the man born to reign and the son born to restore trust. But that night, everything softened. William's voice, when it came, was calm, steady, almost reverent. "I'll honor both." 4 words. Yet they carried the full gravity of the monarchy's 1,000-year line. Behind those words lay a lifetime of watching, learning, and waiting, of standing in the long shadow of duty. William had witnessed the cost of crown and consequence from his earliest years. The press storms, the loss of Diana, the endless scrutiny. And now, as Charles faced the twilight of his reign, William stood not as heir, but as protector. Reports later revealed that the king's staff had overheard fragments of the conversation. Charles's final words, barely audible through the closed door, were, "The future will remember you kindly, my son." Led as I could not. William remained silent for several seconds before replying simply, "Thank you, Father." After the call ended, the king reportedly sat for a long while in his private quarters at Clarence House, staring at the framed photograph of his coronation beside a smaller one of Queen Elizabeth II. He was seen tracing the edge of his ring finger, a symbolic echo of his own mother's transition. He knew history would remember this as the moment he passed, not just authority, but absolution. That night, William did not sleep. He stood by the window overlooking London, watching the lights ripple across the Thames. Somewhere between pride and grief, a truth settled within him. He was no longer preparing for a future reign. He was already living it. And miles away, Charles whispered the same thought that his mother once confided to him. It is time. The coronation that changes everything. The morning after the Archbishop's announcement, Westminster Abbey stirred with renewed energy. A team of royal planners, archivists, and clergy gathered around an oak table beneath the vaulted ceilings, unfolding scrolls of ancient coronation blueprints and modern designs. This was not to be an ordinary crowning. It was to be a reimagined coronation, one that symbolized unity, renewal, and balance between past and present. The king's handwritten decree, delivered through the Archbishop, specified one crucial instruction. Let it be simpler, swifter, and shared. For the first time in modern royal history, the coronation of two monarchs, William and Catherine, would occur simultaneously, symbolizing equality between sovereign and consort. Gone were the days of hierarchy between king and queen. This was to be a crown of partnership, a reflection of a modern monarchy built not on dominance, but on devotion. Inside the abbey, historians debated the logistics. Two thrones positioned side by side, twin anointings performed beneath the Great Cross of St. Edward, and a symbolic merging of the regalia. Catherine's crown would reportedly be modeled on Queen Elizabeth II's diadem, but redesigned with new jewels representing unity among nations, emeralds from Scotland, sapphires from Wales, and rose diamonds from England. The Archbishop herself would perform the crowning, making Sarah Mullally the first woman in British history to anoint and crown a reigning monarch. The spiritual significance was enormous, a female archbishop crowning a female queen alongside her king. It was more than ceremony. It was history correcting its course. Unlike previous coronations filled with pomp and excess, this one would reflect humility and service. The music would include both Handel's Zadok the Priest and a newly commissioned hymn written by modern British composers. 1,000 invited guests would fill the abbey, representatives from charities, faiths, and schools across the Commonwealth. For the first time, no aristocratic hierarchy would dictate seating, an intentional gesture from William and Catherine to the people. Behind the spectacle, the symbolism was unmistakable. The House of Windsor was rewriting its image, not through grandeur, but grace. Cameras would beam the ceremony across 120 nations, and at its center would be two figures, not crowned above the people, but among them. As planning intensified, one note circulated from the Archbishop's office to all participants. This coronation will not celebrate power, it will celebrate purpose. And so it began, the transformation of the monarchy from relic to renewal. By dawn, flags were raised across Britain, choirs rehearsed across cathedrals, and royal tailors worked through the night. 1,000 years of tradition was being rewritten, not in rebellion, but in reverence. The world would soon witness something unseen in modern memory, a coronation that crowned not authority, but love. The nation reacts. By sunrise, Britain had changed. The Archbishop's words echoed through every home, church, and screen. Outside Buckingham Palace, thousands gathered beneath fluttering flags, weeping, cheering, or simply standing in awe. Across London, the bells of St. Paul's and Westminster tolled as if heralding a rebirth. Within hours, television channels suspended regular programming. Hashtags like William and Catherine crowned and new reign Begins surged past 90 million views. For the first time in years, there was unity instead of division. The Prime Minister called it the beginning of a new chapter for both crown and country. Across the Commonwealth, churches rang out hymns of thanksgiving. Critics, too, softened. The coronation wasn't born from tragedy, but continuity. Outside Windsor, children released white balloons, one carrying the note, "Thank you, King Charles. Welcome, Queen Catherine." As night fell, candlelight vigils spread through towns. Citizens held portraits of Queen Elizabeth II beside new images of William and Catherine. A passing of light across generations. Every newspaper carried the same headline: "A Nation Reborn." The monarchy, once burdened by history, now stood renewed, lighter, united, and filled with hope. The dawn of the new reign. Inside Buckingham Palace, transformation had already begun. Jewelers from Garrard and Company prepared a new diadem inscribed with 3 words chosen by William: duty, grace, faith. In Windsor, Archbishop Sarah Mullally rehearsed the sacred oath that would make her the first woman in 1,000 years to crown a monarch. Across the Commonwealth, nations pledged joint services of thanksgiving, turning this into the first global coronation broadcast. Catherine's gown, crafted in secret, was described as a living tribute to Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Days before the event, King Charles III issued one final message: "Let them lead, for love now carries the crown." When dawn broke over London, bells tolled, choirs rose, and the abbey shimmered in gold light. On the Buckingham balcony, William and Catherine appeared hand in hand, king and queen in spirit before ceremony. Millions watched in silence as Britain realized the truth. It had not lost a king. It had gained a future. This historic decision marks the end of one reign and the dawn of another. With King Charles's blessing, Britain prepares to witness the first shared coronation in modern history. As the bells of Westminster prepare to toll, one truth resounds across the world: the future now wears 2 crowns.